desk.
Thank you, Freak. As Jat mentioned there, pretty decisive win for Dignitas, even though it was a very average length game. First thing I want to look at is, because we talked about it so much in the pregame, the lane swap scenario and the fact that it didn't happen, right? We ended up in a 2v2 here, and I think it really did put Fusion at a disadvantage.
Yeah, it did happen. Way too late, though.
That's true.
They tried to swap it so late. They did stay up in CS, but Nien just seemed really scared of that lane. They kind of misplayed it with their backs and trance, and then they lost the turret for it. And they traded Dragon, and that actually gave Dignitas a little bit of a foothold in the game, because then they just kept swapping Core JJ into the lane that didn't have a tier 1 turret up, so then he just knocks it down with Sivir.
Xpecial, looking at that 2v2, though, we see Corki Morgana, which generally you'd say, hey, that seems like a pretty solid early game duo there. Land a binding, get some good damage on top of there. Corki's got great burst. How does that 2v2 play out exactly?
It's actually a really poor lane. There's a bunch of reasons why I picked into it. First reason is that they needed magic damage. Fusion were lacking damage. I mean, they had Nidalee, they had like Sion a little bit, but they didn't have enough, and they also didn't have wave clear. So they picked Corki to kind of supplement that. But Corki is not getting into Sivir. Sivir has her spell shield, and then Morgana's not getting into Sivir either, and then Kennan's getting into Morgana. So that lane was absolutely not good for them 2v2. And then they had Jarvan top against the Sion, which is not absolutely great for Sion, and Sion does a lot better in 2v1. So Fusion 100% should have swapped, but they decided not. Well, they kind of got called. They pretty sure they pointed, and then they just went top. Dignitas did the same thing. They expected them 2v1, but they needed to get that 2v1. Fusion, if they got 2v1, they probably would have came out early game even, and that would have been much better. Or they should have had Nien play a hyper carry and still look for 2v1. But if they don't get 2v1, they at least have an out. But in this game, they weren't going to win team fights if they're this far behind.
The Jarvan is the next thing I want to talk about, because it kind of came out of nowhere. Jarvan top, we've seen it in the past, but does not necessarily fall into the meta of the game currently. So where did it come from?
It's a super risky pick, right? There's definitely a lot of weaknesses to it in the meta. He built it full damage. He ended up 4-0-9 with 313 CS. He got to play his Jarvan 4 top game just pretty much perfectly, blowing up squishies in the backline. The thing is that if it gets behind and it dies early, and if it gets lane swapped on, it's absolutely horrible in those situations. So it's easy to shut down, so it's high risk with, like, I guess, kind of fun reward.
Well, and I mean, we saw what he did to Nien in the backline there anytime he ended up on top of him. But this, again, I mean, it plays into, and you already spoke about it, especially the idea that a 1v2, a lane swap, would have really punished Dignitas for that pickup. So, you know, I think we look to game 2 if they are willing to give the J4 over again, because I wouldn't necessarily say the J4 was the issue. Although a fantastic scoreline, J4, I don't believe, was what, you know, made the decision here in the game in terms of who won and who lost. So knowing that they could give up that J4 again, you think they just pushed really hard for that lane swap and Dignitas might fall into that trap of saying it worked, let's pick it again.
Yeah, I do think that the J4, like, because if you look at Dignitas' picks, their last round was J4 Sivir. That's all they're engaged, because before they have Gragas, Kennen, and Ziggs. So they're looking for their hard engage after they see the Nidalee come out. So they're like, okay, we have to find a way to reach that Nidalee through the Sion. So I think the J4 pick was really good in this situation, and they played it appropriately. Because Jat touched on it, where the Fusion composition is like, we want to poke you and engage. And Fusion fell into this big trap where when they were behind, they just started team fights against a Sivir instead of poking beforehand. So I love the J4 pick, and I don't like the way Fusion played their comp.
The next pick I want to look at for Dignitas was Zingy's Gragas. Gragas is a fantastic champion. However, he fall insanely behind on CS there. He was doing his best to put gank pressure on lanes, but he wasn't getting anything out of it. Xpecial, he ended up 16 CS to 37 within the first 7 minutes of the game. I mean, that again, I feel like is going to be one of the weak points of Dignitas that Fusion and Nintendo can attack.
That was very questionable, I think, in the next game, because Fusion's going to be blue side all these games. They can really go for early first pick junglers and ban out some of Zing's junglers. And if they can keep this sort of advantage on the junglers, we could really see, especially in 2v1 where lanes are more even, and then Nintendo can definitely take over the game, because that performance last game was not good by Zing. He was so far behind, and it was because of blunders, mainly due to their bot lane from Fusion, that a Zing got back into the game. And that's not something that should happen. To be 20 CS behind by level 5, that's insane.
Yeah, and another thing too is since they do swap sides, and you touched on it, Fusion get to drop their Sejuani ban, and Dignitas pretty much have to pick it up because Nintendo. He even like gave us an article on LOE Esports about how good Sejuani is right now. So he's always going to take that champion first. So that's something that Fusion have to think about, and Dignitas definitely have to think about their picks and bans.
All right. I do want to jump into our replay 24 minutes in, mostly because I want to look at the use of the Sivir engage here, as well as the Kennen. And we talked about Kiwi Kid. Is he going to be able to engage the way he wants to? We saw the Annie band away, but the fact that he's picked up Kennen, that's AoE stun engage, right? That's what he loves right there, wants to make that play. And we see it here. We see the power of this bottom lane for Dignitas and their ability to control the map even through the mid and late game. So we're going to pull that up onto your screens right here, and Irene's going to talk us through it.
So this was a good example of how Fusion just overplayed their hand. They go a little too far forward, and the lane wards from Dignitas are really good. You usually should be placing wards to replace dead turrets that you've taken on the enemy's side, so you can flank them like this. So as we roll the clip out, you're going to see they've already pinged that ward, and Gamsu's made the call that he's going to come in. So they start the TP, Core JJ immediately activates his ultimate as they see the Valkyrie leave, and they know Nian at this point is basically, if they can get to him, he's dead, and there's the full damage dunk from Gamsu. And the Sivir ultimate just helps them run down, and Dignitas really kind of revolve around this pick with this composition to roll through Fusion. So just looking back at the picks and bans too, I do think that Fusion might actually drop the Sejuani for a Sivir ban here, the more I think about it, because just that fight right there shows Core JJ's strength on that champion and how they all kind of get on the same page when that ultimate is popped.
Right, that was actually going to be my question coming out of that, was with the side swap, which bans are we going to see dropped and flipped around? Again, we see that J4 as something that, yeah, I mean, that's one of those picks that comes out of left field and you see one time and you have a knee-jerk reaction of, I think we should just ban that because they probably haven't practiced against it too much, right? But that's my fear, right? Is that they will ban it because I think it's beatable.
Yes.
I think that they should not have that reaction. They shouldn't look at it and go, oh, 409, like, oh, we have to get rid of that. He clearly carried the game. No, if you play out the early game the way that the team wants to, there's a way to beat that pick. And finally, I want to look at Fusion's shot calling because we did talk about how, or Jat mentioned how one of their weakest points is their late game shot calling. Sometimes they fall apart there. They've just had the advantage of having a pretty large early game lead in so many of their games that the shot calling doesn't matter as much. Well, here we actually saw a decent example of shot calling for them in that inhib trade. I actually did like the call, and Jat said it as well, when they made the call to switch inhibs. However, they got collapsed on. Irene, I know you had a feeling about a different way that could have played out.
Yeah, the part where they were getting collapsed on, Chunky Fresh still had his TP. If he had TP'd and who he placed one of his trinket wards, he could have TP'd in. They could have had a 3-man unit possibly turned onto Shifter, or at least, because overall it was a 4-on-5 on the map, counting everybody, because they had killed a Zingy beforehand. So if they were able to TP into that, have Morgana keep tabs on the base, keep tabs on who was collapsing, they could have had a better way out of that and possibly deter it. So the shot calling is very good in terms of like we're going to trade things if Nian is involved, if he has actually made it to the late game completely unscathed. So the lane swap, I think, weighed a little bit on his mentality and how he felt the flow of the game was going. So just cleaning that up a little bit is what Fusion has been struggling with for a while. And I don't know if it's going to get better throughout the set as the pressure gets higher and higher. But Fusion, they do usually drop their first game. Mm-hmm. They usually lose their first game, and then they come back after the next one. So we'll see if their support staff has it in them to get their spirits up and to actually go through the picks and bans and come out with a really nice hashed comp.
All right, well, we're going to step away while the teams prepare for our second match between Fusion and Team Dignitas. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of the NA LCS Promotion Tournament after this.
What do I get?
All right, guys.
What do you mean? I forgot.
I don't know your rune pages. What do you mean you forgot?
I'm missing all of them.
Yeah. So make them.
Oh my.
Time is money, friend.
Forcing the heal as well for Nian to try to save his support there. Counter engage, and oh no, the knockup comes through. It stops Valkyrie, and that's first blood. Whole lot of damage comes through. Kiwi Kid tries to engage the move speed, not quite on the stun Huhi, but there's gonna be a Zingy body slam flash. Nearly everyone is dead. Big Zigzal, 1-for-1. Actually, not the worst fight we've seen yet from Fusion, but now it's getting a whole lot worse. A triple kill. Dignitas win game 1 on the road back into the North American LCS.